Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. In today's video, we are going to be looking at some of the key characteristics of each generation in the United States, ranging from Generation Z up to the baby boomers. And I believe that there has been a growing concern or interest in how each generation has been affecting each other in a good or bad way. Today, I've put together a little bit of a ChatGPT model for us. I compressed some information and news articles into one to help us out in this conversation. But I really want to start this conversation off with the growing interest in the homeownership affordability for younger generations. For folks like millennials and Gen Z, the dream of home ownership feels more like a fantasy. The housing market has become a brutal battlefield with sky-high prices, limited inventory, and financial pressures, making it nearly impossible for young buyers to enter the market. And to this, I can't agree more. In recent years, we've really noticed a real change when it comes to mortgage interest rates going up, a lack of supply of new homes on the market, and increased immigration, which has had a trifecta effect when it comes to making the problem even worse for the young generations in the United States. And if we look at the home ownership of the different generations in the United States, we can see a large portion of it is obviously owned by baby boomers and Generation X. And I'm not saying that millennials should own just as many homes as the older generations, but a key concern here is that millennials, all of them are old enough to really start entering the homeownership market and start off their families and hard asset ownership per se, like the older generations, but that really hasn't been the case, and largely because they have been stretched thin financially. Looking here, baby boomers, they really just make up 20% of the US population, but they own about 44% of the supply of homes on the market. And many of them are obviously and understandably they just don't want to sell their homes, right? They're locked into their low interest rates, their homes are paid off, and nowadays, homes are more unaffordable than ever, property taxes are high, and the multiple of income needed to buy a home is higher than ever as well. And that can really be seen here. If we look at the median home price over time relative to the multiple of income needed to get into that first home, it has never been higher. If we look at the 1960s and 80s per se, when baby boomers and were really entering the market, buying their first home, they only needed to save on average 2.2 years of their income to buy that first home, which was essentially nothing. That's very little work relative to what a younger person needs to do today to buy the median value home, which if we look here, the average home today, it's worth about $436,000 as of 2023, and the median household income is only about $75,000, which puts us here at a roughly 6x multiple of income needed to buy a home. And that's really had an impact on things like starting a family and having a healthy society from a demographic standpoint. And over the last few decades, we've been noticing a growing trend and declining birth rates as a whole in the United States and even globally, especially in the Asian markets, but that is really a different conversation for a different video. But if we look at the average births in the United States per 1,000 people, it has been on a steady decline over the past few decades. And this is largely concerning, and there can be definitely a number of reasons for this, such as larger government spending, increased inflation, unaffordability when it comes to homes, and it's all leading to a smaller and smaller birth rate in the United States, which over time is going to put increased pressure on the younger generations to take care of the older generations. And if we look at some of the key issues going on today, right, if we look at the government spending and things like that, and how it's increasing inflation, increasing asset prices at a faster rate than incomes are going up for the younger generation, it makes it almost impossible to get out of the rat race. And I mean, if we look at the government spending crisis here, we just have to read here. Older generations aren't just hoarding homes, they're also putting a massive financial strain on the system through pensions, healthcare, and Social Security, of which, if we look at government spending, make up the bulk of government spending at the end of the day. Social Security, I believe, is around $1 to $2 trillion of the $6 or $7 trillion that the government spends every single year. And if your household income is, let's say, $100,000, and you look at your paycheck every month, about 6% of it is going towards just Social Security income. and it's also being matched by your employer with another 6%. So in total, if you're making $100,000 per year, about $12,000 is between you and your employer is paid to Social Security. And if you're a younger person entering the workforce, making a decent income, a large portion of your income is going to pay for the Social Security of older generations, making it much more difficult for yourself to get ahead as the government is taking more of your money and giving it to someone else, as there's really no Social Security fund. The government doesn't have a fund with trillions of dollars of Social Security investments going to baby boomers. It doesn't exist. The government's bankrupt. So essentially every dollar that you pay into the tax for Social Security goes to someone else in the form, some older, possibly silent generation individual or baby boomer for Social Security, and they're living off of that income. Now, if you were to take that $12,000 and invest it over time, you'd probably outperform what you'll receive in the future for Social Security. But the government has created a much less efficient source of income for older generations by just taking from the young and giving to the old. It's kind of a classic play of Peter stealing from Paul to give to Sam. It's just not very efficient at the end of the day. And largely, if the US government debt is now at $34 trillion, up from about $6 trillion just over 20 years ago. And if we look at sort of like national debt to GDP, I believe it's about a little bit over 120% debt to GDP, and a little over $1 trillion per year is being spent just on the interest alone. So what is largely happening here is that the financial health of younger generations is being diminished by large government spending and the extraction of their wealth going to the older generations to fund their retirement and prop up the asset system as a whole. As we can't let the bubble burst per se. We can't get rid of Social Security for the older generations, or that would cause absolute economic meltdown. But really, what's going on here is likely a generational crisis between millennials and Gen Z as they're being pressured out by older generations and the mistakes that have happened over time. And I think that in many decades from now, probably 20 to 40 years from now, as the assets transfer from older generations into the hands of the younger generations, some of that pressure will go away. However, what's happening right now is an increased financial debt bubble being created by the government spending problem that's going on, and it's all going to have to paid off by the younger generations. But unfortunately, the can has been continued to be kicked down the road. But I think the key issue here, what everyone should see at the end of the day, is just the different pros and cons between each generation. Baby boomers own much of the assets, and their offspring, which is largely the millennials, will be the largest beneficiary of those assets and such. And for Generation Z, their parents largely being Generation X, who is the second largest asset owner generation in the United States behind the baby boomers. So over time, this problem will largely go away. However, as I mentioned earlier in the video, with the declining birth rate, even future generations will have the same problems as the ones alive today. Because a society that has a birth rate below 2.1 births per woman, that's below the replacement value needed to maintain the current population. I think right now the United States is around 1.5 to 1.6 births per woman, which is largely unsustainable long term and creates this upside down pyramid effect where the largest generation in the United States is really always just going to be the oldest generation unless we flip around the birth rate problem and have more kids, which is really going to be the only thing that can solve this whole problem at the end of the day. As right now, since the baby boomers are retiring out of the market at about 6,000 to 7,000 people per day, over time, over the next 5 to 10 years, that number is going to be jumping up to about 10 or 11,000 people per day, which is more people retiring than younger people entering the workforce. And the only thing recently that has been countering all this big problem between the supply of labor has been immigration, which largely is a little bit controversial, right? Because immigration is great for the supply of labor, but it's controversial politically because they don't pay taxes, etc. It's a whole conversation for a different video. But right now what's going on, the current health of the demographics in the United States doesn't appear to be sustainable and healthy long term, as the replacement value just isn't there, and we're now relying on immigration to keep a steady workforce in the United States and steady supply of taxes and etc. to keep the bubble from bursting, because that's what matters at the end of the day. We don't want the bubble to burst and there be an economic meltdown, because that would just make the problem even worse, right? So I think over time, what we should all be looking at is ways to understand the problem going on and be able to solve it. Yes, we can have more kids, that will solve the problem, but I don't think that'll be what really happens long term as a solution. It seems like we're going down a rabbit hole of artificial intelligence and robotics long term to make up for the lack of supply of labor needed to build us more homes, make us more things, and keep things affordable for future generations, as each generation going forward appears will be smaller than the previous generation as well. But as these larger and older generations die off, this phenomenon has never happened in the history of the United States. But these larger generations will pass down more homes and more assets than the younger generations can absorb. If generations like baby boomers have more homes than the Generation Z, a smaller generation, is able to buy, then there will be an oversupply of homes on the market, lack of demand, leading to lower prices and increased affordability, which might dictate that the future asset prices of homes really might not be holding their value as well as people may perceive in today's market. But that's really all I have for today's video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.